I guess I have to say good morning for many of you. So let's start. So the idea is to, let's say, explore the different or the many factors that influence our ability to identifying, analyze, and so probability, normal, and impact, and also to propose response strategies when we deal with, of course, project risk management. So this is the topic. You can notice from this first slide what we are speaking about. That is, sometimes people don't take, let's say, the best judgment and evaluation in their decisions. So this is then please try to remember this slide, because then we will comment together at the end of this presentation what are the issues, what are the, let's say, the cognitive issues related to this slide. So let's use it as a starting point and as an ending point. So let's see the first one. The first one is the so-called cognitive capture. What's the meaning? When an individual focuses mental energy on one issue, it can cause him or her to miss out other important things or issues. I will give you an example with this picture that I guess is a great example of cognitive capture. That is, if you are too focused on one issue, then unfortunately you are kind of blind on other issues. So what is where is the impact of the cognitive capture? Well, mainly in continuous risk identification. That is, continuous risk identification means regardless, let's say, the formal analysis that we perform on our project, that is, for example, we have a meeting on risk analysis, continuous risk identification means having risk, let's say, that are identifying, let's say, during every time of the project. Cognitive capture, if you have too capturist, if you are too focused on a specific issue, unfortunately, you cannot see new risk emerging. So the suggestion is, let's say, increase the frequency, for example, of risk identification meetings. This is one suggestion. Another one, it seems a little bit trivial, but then we discover that it works a lot, is using a good checklist. I underline the word good, because checklist can help teams in identifying risk. These are good checklists. Otherwise, if you have bad checklists, that is checklists that are not able to cover all the topics that are needed in a specific project, unfortunately, you will end up with a very partial, let's say, list of risk. So good checklists are very useful to decrease the cognitive capture. And then another thing that normally is performed by very large corporations, such as NASA, for example, having someone not involved in risk response has moderators of those meetings. That is, if you are too involved, unfortunately, you are not able to see really all the risks that are coming. Next one. We have 11 to mention, so we have done the first one. Let's see the second one. Second one called insensitivity to sample size or law of small numbers. And you can notice that here we have an example of a car crash with, let's say, very fast cars, race cars. The example is, speed is not related to injuries in case of car crash because, and here it comes the law of small numbers, because my cousin crashed his car at 200 kilometers per hour and he reported no injuries at all. Yesterday, on the opposite, a woman had a car crash in downtown at less than 30 kilometers per hour and she died. This is a typical example of generalizing a single or a few events and saying, okay, this is the rule for our world or for our project. I don't know if it happens to you, for example, if you use Facebook, you will have a lot of examples of small numbers. Just to give you an example, when we deal with the topic related to, for example, health, many people say, you know, I had these injuries and with this medication I had no problems at all. And others say, no, in my case it's different, so it doesn't work. So there is always a confrontation, let's say, on a one-to-one basis, but of course there are too small numbers to generalize. And this is another issue in many project environments, unfortunately, because you tend to generalize just your experience or just one event. relevant for what? Is it relevant especially for probability and impact estimates, because in this case, depending on what happened in the past, you can say that you can overrate or underrate, for example, the probability and the impact, and also the interpretation of the historical series. That is, sometimes it happens that you call something historical series, but in practice, it is not. When I deal with, I do a lot of consultancy activities for many companies. Very often they say, based on our historical records, and I say, okay, the historical records, what we are speaking about? Well, it happens twice. You can say, okay, this is not an historical series, so you're trying to generalize something that has no value from a statistical point of view. So I mentioned statistic because one of the suggestions is if you have a statistics training, normally you don't, you are able to discriminate between, let's say, things that are not relevant from a statistical perspective and things that are relevant for statistical perspective. Another thing is having statistical data, because sometimes if you may have, let's say, a feeling, but if you have data, you can change your feeling. And another thing is domain knowledge. What does it mean, domain knowledge? Let's go back to the example we mentioned in the previous slide. So having a car crash. If you speak, for example, with a professional driver, they know what they're speaking about. So they know that speed is one of the main source of, let's say, danger in driving a car. If you have someone that never drove, maybe the answer can be completely different. So these are the suggestions. First of all, statistic training, statistic data, and then also having knowledge on a specific domain. Then another one, so the third one, that is the so-called availability. So I have a question for you. Suppose you randomly sample a word of 3 or more letters from an English text, okay? It is more likely that the word starts with an R, an example is rope, or that the R is the third letter, that is park. What you say? Say with the chat, just to provide your answers. What do you think? Don't, because I will ask a lot of things. Start with an R, third letter, start with the letter R, risk, and so the first letter. So we are 4 against 1 for now. Third letter, 4-2. Okay. Yeah, okay. You are able to provide an example, but is that I will show you the what happened with these experiments. And now, for sure, right now you already know that. Let's say that this is a tricky question, but out of 152 persons, so they didn't know that. It was a tricky question. 105 believe that R is the more frequent as a first letter. The opposite is true. Based on the studies, for example, these 2 authors won a Nobel Prize, just to give you an idea. These and also other studies. And why? Because it's very simple. In your brain, it's much easier to identifying, let's say, words that start with the letter R. With the letter, having the R on the third position is much more difficult for your brain to identify. And so, let's say, this information is more available. That's why it's called availability. Test. They are not, since we're speaking about risk, they are not good news. So consider this pairs of cause of death: lung cancer versus motor vehicle accident, emphysema versus homicide, tuberculosis versus fire and flames. So the idea is, let's try to understand what are, let's say, by comparing lung cancer versus motor vehicle cycle, and then another couple is emphysema versus homicide, and the last one, tuberculosis versus fire and flames. What are the most probable events? You the results, just to give you an idea of the availability bias, that is,